What is up, fellas? Welcome to another episode of Rewriting History with me, the Goob. And today I am joined by Chris, and we're going to have a little chat about ancient America, different groups that came here, and see where the conversation leads us. So, welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Very cool. Very glad to be here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining me. And then I'm going to go ahead and drop a link as well into the chat. So if anyone would like to call in while we're talking and contribute or ask questions, they are welcome to do so. But yeah, we were just chatting a little bit, and I've talked about ancient Hebrews in America before. I've covered that a decent amount, and I've somewhat covered Ogham and Roman evidence over here as well, but largely focusing on the Hebrews. But I know you've talked about this connection between Welsh languages and Native American languages. And I've heard about this, but I don't know much about it. So if you could elucidate a bit on what's actually going on there, and what are these connections that we're seeing between the Welsh and the Americas?
Well, the Welsh is one story, the Hebrews and Ogham and Romans another. But the Welsh Native American story is basically that up to 70,000 Welshmen at one time, basically 6th century, mid-500s, came to the Americas under King Arthur II of Wales. And so up to 70,000 doesn't mean it was that. It means that's what the boats could carry. They came into the Americas, one route through Mobile Bay, Alabama, all over Kentucky, and then obviously up into the Mandan of, North Dakota, up there, Montana. So just Welsh presence all over, and their language. And this is where you lose almost everybody, probably 99%, is their language was Colburn, and that's a real language. And that is found in at least 75 places in Kentucky. The Colburn is a real language, and that's found all over the Americas, over Kentucky, and all over Europe and the Mideast, Near East, UK. So that's that. Thanks for the intro.
And is Colburn an amalgamation of different languages, or what is Colburn exactly? And before even that, the Mandan, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Mandan tribe is the tribe that reportedly had like blonde hair, blue eyes, and settlers were able to communicate with them by speaking, was it Dutch, or I guess, was it Welsh?
Well, it's, and forgive me, I'm not, when I don't know, I won't say, but it's, like Norse and Algonquin have a lot of words together. There's just these language connections. There were 1,700 different languages in the Americas, 1,700. That takes so long to develop those languages. And so the Mandan purported to have some Welsh Bibles that one went up into Canada and went missing, and that was kind of gone forever. And another one supposedly burned at Granny Dollar's cabin, or at least that's the story. But Welsh Bibles certainly would have had that Colburn language in it, and that's found all over the world. I don't know all over the world, but it's found. Colburn is the ancient mother language. It's it's where all of the future languages originated from, was Colburn.
Okay. So are you suggesting its source is Welsh? That's where Colburn originated, or do you even speculate on that?
So there's some experts on this, and they're doing great work and sharing great work. Basically, what I know is Welsh comes from Troy. And so that's, Brutus and Welsh, and that history goes to Troy. The survivors, eventually become, Welsh there after, different things. But that's a very special bloodline. That is where Jesus's body with his wife, Mary Magdalene, was brought to. First France, basically UK. That's where, in Wales, that's the first church where they did excavations there. That's the first Christian church. And then it was brought back to the Mideast after being in Wales, 33 AD or so. So it's a very special bloodline, and that bloodline continues to this day. Um, and it's through a daughter, basically, of Jesus and Mary, and then married a major king, and then Constantine the First is that line, this Welsh line, all the way to Council of Nicaea. You know, he's a Welsh. His mother's Welsh, so it's a very special, important line that they've gotten rid of that history. They've gotten rid of the specialness of the Welsh history, unfortunately.
Okay, so you briefly mentioned Tartaria before the show started. Is this connected to that? Because I'm trying to put together what you're saying and like keep track of a timeline in my head. And so you're talking about Colburn being the originator language, like the original language, and then you're going back to times of Jesus and such. So, I mean, like obviously we had multiple languages by the time of Jesus, right? So, is this like a separate timeline from what's currently accepted, where events are playing out differently, or am I just misunderstanding? Maybe.
No, I think it's wonderful. What a great thought and question, and it's perfect. Tartaria seems to be older, or at least different, and you and I, we're figuring this out together. There's so much research and knowledge being shared, and so Tartaria seems to be older or different. That doesn't seem to be the Welsh thing.
Okay, but is what you're proposing still like relatively in line with mainstream history as a whole, is like the overall time these things are taking place, or are you diverging in a similar way that the Tartaria theory diverges?
No, that's a beautiful question. I'd love to learn from you on what you think about that. That's a great thought. I don't know. I'm not. The only thing would be,
Okay.
if you follow the Welsh dating system, the Welsh calendars, that would put us this year in 2051, I believe, not 2025. Until somebody corrects me, that's my understanding, that they have the most accurate records. The actual churches had in the 6th century, there was a big bad comet impact, some type of, where the UK went dark for a decade. There were no crops, nothing could grow. And that, I guess, coincided with a few different things around the world at the
You
same
said the
time.
sixth century?
6th century.
Yeah, that's something I've been looking at more recently. And like you said, what was going on around the world and trying to figure out how that affected the Americas. Because from what I can tell, like Central America used to be a much more, like Montana, stuff like that, used to be much warmer, much easier climate, much more stable climate. They didn't have the harsh winters. And I think that's a big part of why we don't see the same types of constructions in America. Why build these grand megalithic stone structures when the weather is so comfortable that you can exist happily in a hut and you can go forage and hunt from the bountiful streams and all of the bison and everything? So yeah, I think there was a climate shift around the same time in America as well that went from this almost Garden of Eden like, country where the weather's just beautiful, easy to go. There's nut trees everywhere, plants with fruit and animals everywhere. Then it shifted to what we have now, which is still not a bad climate, but we do have harsh winters in the middle of the country, right? And there's some evidence of tropical birds like parrots in central, like, United States. There's some native artifacts that seem to depict these things. So yeah, I think there was a warmer climate in central United States before around 600 years ago. And yeah, the climate seems to have changed around the world around that time, but also in somewhat isolated, like the northern part of the climate seems to have been affected more than the southern hemisphere during this time. So
fabulous. Thank you so much for that. Very cool.
Yeah.
And
still working on piecing that together, though.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Who knows? Maybe it's right. So, because does that apply to South America as well? Peru, what you're saying when you say Central America?
So that's what I'm saying is I'm talking about the United States, and this climate change shift seems to have affected the northern hemisphere more than the southern hemisphere. So around 600, 800 years ago, there, like you talk about, wine used to be grown in the UK, and then there was something happened and that decreased severely. The weather seemed to get colder in the northern hemisphere around this time, and it was warmer up until that time.
Thank you. Very cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Good work, Goob.
Yeah.
All right. Well, where should we? Okay. So because the thinking is that Peru, also I can say Belize, which is Central America, versus Peru down south, that there is so much stuff underneath the lidar that's visible there. You're talking metropolises maybe all over, but you're definitely talking every few miles, temple, stone structures just everywhere down there.
Yeah.
Hidden under this just massive growth that takes 10 men a month to remove just the top type thing.
Yeah. No, the amount that is still left to be discovered in South America and the density with which South America is occupied by these ancient ruins is something that I've been on from day one of this channel. And LiDAR has only been confirming that. There's a thought that I've had recently that occurred to me recently about Peru, and I have not done the investigation to, figure out whether there's any validity to it. But there's certainly a lot of mountaintop ruins. We have, Machu Picchu, we have Ollantaytambo, we have the Calisaya and Lake Titicaca, all of that up there, and all of the other ruins around Lake Titicaca. And we don't, and while, yes, we are discovering things with LiDAR, like there is a lot less prevalence of these ruins in the lower areas. But there's a Huari archaeological site. It's called the Huari archaeological site, which predates the Inca by, 500 years. And they were originally thought to not be megalithic, but in 2014, they did further excavations and they found pretty extensive megalithic construction, and it was meters below the ground level. And this is only a few hundred years old, less than 1,000 years old or so. And it was already buried that deeply under all of this soil. And so I'm wondering if perhaps the reason why there's a concentration of these megalithic sites on mountains is not because there's actually a concentration there, but everything else has just been buried. And those are what was left exposed, because on a mountain, what's going to bury something on top of a mountain?
Wow. Beautiful.
So
good.
I'd have to go and look at maps and topographical maps and try and do it. And I haven't done the legwork to do that, but it's something that it did occur to me. It's like, why go through the effort of building on the mountain specifically? Well, maybe they didn't. Maybe they built everywhere, and that's just what is still exposed.
Sure.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Just stuff is all under there, and so that's very good on the mountaintops, because that's what you find in North America is the mountaintops is along the rivers, which were the highways, the super highways. Right. You didn't go walking through sharp trees and bushes. You just got in your canoe, you went down the river. And so along the rivers, the mountaintops, but also the bluffs, you just have rock art, and you have, all sorts of stuff just along all those rivers down there, especially Kentucky, West Virginia. I mean, there's a great history there. So the connection of up there versus down south, those shamans came up to Wisconsin in ancient times just as they do now. And that's true. It's just a fact.
Yeah. Yeah, there's evidence of trading going back 2,000 years from South America, North America, both coasts. 2,000 years ago, they were already having trade networks that covered this entire, massive landmass. Yeah.
Well, Goob, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So you like all of the different groups coming to the Americas before Columbus or before the Vikings? Like, you like, which are your favorites?
I think there definitely was a very good amount of that going on. Yeah.
And so your issue becomes then this not land claim that these groups are ever going to be able to get their land back. That's just not going to happen.
Right.
But
That ship has sailed. Yeah.
even if there was a land claim, against this papal bull, that said you can take the land of anybody that's a non-Christian, a savage, even though there's certainly Christians here. But so it's the justification to take the land is that nobody came here before Columbus.
Right.
And
And so
yes,
that's a pretty big motivation to cover up those previous people. The most powerful country in the world wouldn't exist if we hadn't.
yeah.
So, yeah.
And they went out of their way, John Wesley Powell and the Smithsonian and the early days of the Bureau of Ethnology, they went out of their way and orchestrated the railroad companies and to basically demolish different sites. Like it's just what happened. Unbelievable.
Yeah. I don't know if you're familiar with Hanukkah Mound in Ohio.
The Menorah Mound?
Yeah.
Yeah. What
Yeah, I mean, that
about
was
it?
that was another one that got destroyed, like so many of them. But yeah.
And I have several people, or at least, that have tried to find that mound in their lifetime with the LiDAR and with everything. And I just asked the guy, have you found it? And it's basically like, no, we haven't.
Yeah, I did see some attempts with matching up surveys and LiDAR and stuff. And there were some suggestions from people that, oh, we think we've found a little part of it that's remaining. Like this is some of the candlesticks sticking up. But if they are right, there's not much left of it. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Well, the Hebrew topic coming to America, that's one group, and a main group. But, these inscriptions that the Hebrew inscriptions, like, do any come to mind that you like or any evidence of?
So the Bat Creek Stone, I think, is the number one most solid proof of evidence of both a cover-up of an artifact in America and of a legitimate artifact that, is ancient Hebrew.
Yeah.
Because the Bat Creek Stone, it was discovered by a Smithsonian archaeologist who was anti-diffusion. It was labeled as Cherokee, even though Cherokee didn't exist at the age of this stone. And it sat for over 3 decades on a shelf with zero attention from anybody before someone came by and went, hey, that looks a lot like Hebrew, at which point it, gained interest. But for decades, this anti-diffusionist Smithsonian archaeologist just did nothing with it. It just sat on a shelf. And then after his death, after people did recognize this as ancient Hebrew, they now slander him and accuse him of planting this artifact and making it a fake. And it really has to be an original artifact because the way it was found was with skeletons and entangled in the roots of a tree that was many decades old already. So, it's an and I think there's even some other factors adding to its legitimacy, but it has quite literally like every single possible thing going for it that would indicate it's legitimate, and it is still regarded by the mainstream as an absolute hoax and fraud and fake. So,
well, it's quite a story. It was actually, it's it was displayed upside down for a long time. Right. Cyrus Gordon was an early Hebrew professor that taught Zena Halpern, was a mentee, mentor of each other. But Cyrus Gordon wrote a whole bunch of books on ancient America stuff. And the Bat Creek, love that story. The Kensington Runestone is another one, but that's not Hebrew. Nobody's saying that. But the Los Lunas stone in New Mexico, which I don't know if you think is what you think of that one, but
I don't know what to think of it, but I love the reason for its dismissal. So the archaeologist who first inspected that stone, because it had been like reported a few times, and then eventually someone goes out to look at it, right? And the archaeologist who did so was an archaeologist who brought proof of pre-Clovis civilizations as well, or not civilizations, but peoples. And so he had his reputation tarnished and dragged through the mud for his pre-Clovis evidence, which they still accuse him of faking, even though there is absolutely zero evidence of any fakery. And in fact, the best argument they have for his evidence not being legitimate is that burrowing animals mixed up the strata layer, so it was misdated, which, okay, maybe, but that certainly doesn't make him a fraud and a liar, even if that's the case. And so he still is called a fraud and a liar for his pre-Clovis discoveries. And so because of his pre-Clovis discoveries, they go, we can't trust him. And so this Los Lunas stone is also obviously a fraud that he's lying about. But yeah, the one in New Mexico, there's other Decalogue stones as well.
Yeah.
And then I don't know what you think about things like the Michigan relics and the Burroughs Cave relics and the Burroughs Cave relics. I actually find the Michigan relics very intriguing. And there is very obviously a cover-up with the Michigan relics. Whether they are real or fake, they are being covered up, and like information is being deliberately withheld from them. So that makes me think they could be real. The fact that, you know, a copper plate was inspected and it was a modern fake and it did match all of these indicators of modern fakes, but they looked at that one copper plate to make the determination that all of the copper plates were modern fakes, even though other copper plates were clearly hand hammered, right? Whereas this one was like a rolled copper plate, right? But they look at that one and they dismiss all of them through that one. And then with the clay tablets, they submerged these clay tablets for up to 5 days at a time, fully submerged underwater. And then after soaking them for days at a time, would manually crumble them and destroy them. And this was proof that these clay tablets couldn't have been legitimate because they couldn't have survived in the Michigan soil. Except we have clay tablets from Sumeria going back thousands of years that survived no problem buried in the sands of the desert. And you can go, oh, it's drier there. Okay, but they've existed for thousands of years. The desert has seen rain in that time, right? And they survived all of those thousands of years. But then when they were excavated and they were left in a shed that was exposed to the elements above the ground, tens of thousands of them have been destroyed now. We have lost thousands and thousands of clay tablets because they've been exposed to rainwater. But these Michigan tablets, we submerge them and then destroy them, and that's proof that they were fake. So, that seems like a deliberate destruction and a deliberate act of, dismissal that isn't actually reasonable. So you look at these things, you look at how the museum handled these artifacts. There were agreements between the owners of the artifacts and the museum that were blatantly broken by the museum and just disrespected by the museum. And then the museum went, you know what, these are all ours. We legally own these now, so we can do whatever we want despite your wishes. And we're going to take them all out of display and no one's ever going to see them again. So you combine all of these factors together and it goes, well, why are they doing all of this if there's not legitimacy to them?
Thank you. Amazing. Yes. Okay. Well, you're, I mean, I could tell you what I think, but you've just taught me 100 things. So, but yeah.
By the way, there's a really great book written by a woman. She was a code breaker. She believed in the Michigan relics. I forget her name off the top of my head, but if you look up like code breaker Michigan relics, you should be able to find her. The book is accessible online. It's a short read. It's a great read. Not only is it very informative about the Michigan relics, but she also talks 100 years ago about the same problems we're talking about today, about how there's obvious efforts to cover up ideas of diffusion and things like that. So it's a decent read if you want to check her out. But sorry to interrupt. Go on.
No, well, thank you very much. So some of these people that you speak of, they had a lot of correspondence back and forth, a lot of letters between each other, before emails and stuff back in the 70s, 50s, a lot of science going on. And a lot of these artifacts were looked at, or at least are continuing to be looked at. In the last 30 years, you used to be able to measure an artifact in parts per million. 30 years ago, parts per million, you could look down and see it. Now, it's parts per billion. And you're able to see a few drops of water in a swimming pool, the technology that is available to test some of this stuff and to answer some of these questions. It's a very interesting time with science. So, very interesting story. You said Henriette Mertz, the mystic
Yes,
symbol.
that's the lady's name. Thank you. That's the lady who wrote the book I was talking about. Yeah.
She's that book was published posthumously. I had to look that up after her death. No, I'm just kidding. But she was a retired naval aviator, an attorney. She was a retired naval attorney, and she was tasked by this judge to, I want you to determine if these tablets are fake or real. She says, okay, I can undertake this task in my later years, real respected attorney, naval attorney. So she tasks, and she basically concludes, we cannot conclude that they're fake, that it's just, you cannot conclude that this is a fake, bogus story. And so that basically the phrase is ipsit dippic, that we took from her book, which means I do as my superior says, or I do, it's literally, it's ipsit dippic. I do as my superior says. It's an unbelievable phrase, but forgive me for getting on a tangent.
No, but that's very much, part of the problem that we see. They just do what they're told.
Well, what are your thoughts on, since the Michigan tablets are definitely real? There were
another fun fact about them. The final dig that those two guys did included 7 of their leading detractors. And the result of that was that they found more relics also buried in the roots of a tree that was at least 100 years old. And some of the detractors maintained their detraction. They continued saying they're obvious fakers, they're hoaxers. They accused them of using sleight of hand to put the artifacts there, although no one caught them. They have 7 people actively trying to catch them in the act of doing this. They had no evidence of it, but they maintained that that's what had happened. But it was enough that either 2 or 3 of them, I think 2 completely switched their position, and one of them actually became like an active advocate for the Michigan relics. And these were the 7 like most vocal leading, voices against the Michigan relics, and they managed to flip 2 of them and turn one of them into an active advocate.
Well, I didn't know that. I love it.
They did.
Awesome, Goob. Love it. Didn't know that. That's very cool.
Yeah.
These were found in counties all over, just everywhere. They're finding these things all over the place, 10,000, it's like that's the Burroughs Cave story, is that you're basically implying, if you're saying that, I want to ask what you think, then I'll go, or I can start, but go ahead.
Yeah, you go ahead. I've talked a lot, I feel like.
You're basically, somebody is implying that Russ Burroughs or whoever, Jack Ward, who was at the Son of the Back Indian Museum in Vincennes, Indiana, somebody's implying that somebody hoaxed thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces with these symbols that you look at it, and there's so much going on there, and so much going, and so many of them, and
and they also had the forethought to pre-bury all of these things long enough so that the mounds are returning to a natural-looking state so they can be dug up. Because all of these digs, they weren't just those 2 guys. They were accompanied by other people. There were other people present with these digs. And so it's not like they're just going there the night before to bury it, because that would be obvious, right? And none of this was ever. So yeah, it's not only a massive hoax on the scale, but also the forethought, the planning. Like, they would have had to dedicate decades before even starting this hoax.
Yeah, they archaeologists use the same phrases, like the rat carried the spear tip into the mammoth bone. Like, they have an excuse, a phrase for, like you said earlier, just they can come up with the rarest of rarest possibilities for something that's so beyond logic and comprehension, but because they say it, it has to be true and believed. But forgive me for jumping around, but just
But your thoughts on, I think, Brewers or
well, Brewers Cave is Utah.
What's the other one? My mind just blank. It's Brewers, and what's the other cave?
No, that's right. Brewers Cave, Utah. I know some people working on that one. Another one is Burroughs Cave.
Burroughs, thank you. That my brain just wouldn't come up with that for a second. But yeah, I think you were about to share your thought on that, perhaps.
But that's a story. That's a 40-year story. Million words have been written about that. But also some other finds. Treasures, buried treasures. I literally just learned about this a few weeks ago. Just stuff buried all over, from Confederate gold days to the Knights Templar bringing treasures over. Like, this stuff is like all like real. It's like crazy, like a lot of treasures. So the Burroughs Cave is one, found by Russell Burroughs, 1982, April. Unearthed thousands of stone relics with inscriptions, and all the early ones were small. They started getting bigger, but just it's so it's they said that Sequoia made up the Cherokee language. They said that Colburn was made up. It's so difficult to make up a language. 1,700 different languages in the Americas, like. Who knows how many in California, like, 100 tribes, 200 tribes in California. Like, you're talking about a million mounds. How many people? Hundreds of millions, billions, tens of millions. I have no idea. They brought soil, special soil for sites like Cahokia and some of these special mounds. They brought that soil from so far away. It's layers of different colors, like just unbelievable, the complexity and possibility of how many people were involved in the Americas. Amazing.
Right. And even some mainstream scientists discuss how 2,000 years ago they were circling the square. Like, there's mounds that suggest that there's not only celestial alignments with the sun and the moon, but more complex mathematical ideas like circling the square. And so that was 2,000 years ago in Hopewell, doing that.
Have you ever heard of Dr. James P. Shears?
I'm not too familiar. No, I don't think so.
Okay, he has surveyed Indian mounds over the last long time, but he's an engineer. But above ground surveys and directions, and towards sunrises and all that stuff up in Wisconsin. And so that's a very special area up there, Wisconsin, with the effigy mounds in these alignments that you're talking about. An eagle that's a 1/4 mile long. You were meant to sit in one spot and look out at just an array of effigy mounds in all different shapes and all different animals, and like where they come to life. They're almost in 3D. The eagle, it's slightly
with the shadows.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Exactly. But that it's coming to life. And so what was going on so long ago? It was such smart intelligence that they just don't want, obviously, us to think about. Obviously. So.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's one of the most prevalent themes, is that everyone before us was an Ooga Booga cavemen. They were retarded. They couldn't, do anything intellectual, but they had endless time and labor. You have all of this time and labor to smash two stones together, but never any time to think about the world around you. They never ever did that. Don't even think that they might think about the world around. They would dedicate millions of lives to smashing stones together, but zero to observing the world around them and actually thinking. Yeah, it's and I mean, obviously that's untrue, and obviously even archaeologists recognize that's untrue, but that is the prevailing kind of attitude that's put out towards the general populace,
Well, thank you. If I may just say about circling the square just real quick, and the long distance sailing routes of going across precise latitudes across the Atlantic and Pacific, no problem, but Atlantic, just, you go across these latitudes, and that the megalithic yard is in some of these mounds, an old world unit in some of these mounds. Like,
Right.
there's just no getting around that.
Yeah.
There was an ancient device called a torquetum, a Chinese torquetum, Torqu torquetum, and it was a celestial navigation device that the Chinese could use no problem. The Chinese is one group that came here. The Polynesians, no problem that Tamol boat of Santa Barbara is a Polynesian boat. The oil that just seeps out, the rivets, it's a Polynesian design, the Tamol. So no doubt about it, the contact, but India is the one that we miss. India, at a Mohenjo-daro, an ancient seaport, before some type of nuclear something, but just these oceans were the highways. They were no problem traveling these oceans. That's kind of the big thing. So I love that.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely with that. Yeah. It's interesting.
Thank
You
you.
just mentioned India. Of all of the groups that I've looked into coming to the Americas, that's one that hasn't even occurred to me to look for.
Yes, well, this is a major one, and possibly, I'm learning. I don't know, but basically, you have Gene Matlock wrote about it. You also have Shaman Lal wrote about it. His passport was taken, but I'm almost there. We're figuring it out, but basically, the Adena were 7 feet the men, 6 feet the women. The Hopewell were closer to 5 feet. So India, in this, that very possibly you're dealing with, that's South America, and like which was first, because Dr. Carl Johansson wrote about thousands of plants and viruses and vegetables and herbs and that went across the seas in ancient times. Diffusion, just 101, the best master on the topic. Wrote it with Sorensen, but Carl Johansson. And basically, we don't know that corn that could have started in the Americas, then gone to India, then back to the Americas. It could have also started India, then Americas back. So it's like India is a big part of this ancient history. Those temples are, who knows how on earth they built all that stuff with hammer and chisels. I have no idea, Boo.
So I've got a take that might differ from yours a bit.
Yes.
I think that the majority of what we see in India actually aligns with the dating that it's given.
Very good.
So like, I know alternate history people, they like to push things back and go, all the stones are older than they say. There's, the Kailasa temple, which is the one that's constructed out of the mountain of granite that's, in one solid piece, right? And it has, it's either the Mahabharata or one of their other holy books, but it like the temple is the book, right? All the carvings on the wall are depicting the story of that holy book. And that holy book also records real world events, like real world wars that happened 1,500 years ago. And those are incorporated into this temple. And so to me, the temple has to be younger than that. It can't be over 1,500 years old, right? And the official dating is around 1,000 years old, I believe. I'd have to double check that exactly, but it's within the last 1,500 years. And that is one of the most impressive temples in India, in my opinion. And so I think that it actually is more likely that all of these temples, as crazy as it is, that they all spring up in this short amount of time. And in recent times, I think that is what happened. But like you said, I don't really know how, because hammer and chisel seems like a bit of a stretch.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, Goop, thank you. So, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to figure out, maybe you can help me, but this timeline thing, there's some weird things around, I know it's goofy, but like J536, but then it's like, are we missing 1,000-year timeline? Or, some people say we weren't around 1,000 years ago. So just what do you think about the timeline? Just any changes or any?
So about that specifically, the J, it's like so many other issues where there are very compelling arguments for both sides. You can look, and I can't cite the towns, but like there's people who've looked at, the historical records for old cities and stuff, and they'll show that like not a single building was built in this city throughout this whole stretch of time. And it's like, and then they'll align it with other supporting. So there is a lot of evidence where you could make a case where if you're just providing the evidence for the missing 1,000 years, anyone who looks at that would walk away convinced. But you can do the exact same thing in the reverse. You can make a very compelling case that that's not what happened. So it honestly is very difficult for me to try and make a determination. I lean towards the idea that our timeline is not as rock solid as we think it is, but the idea that 1,000 years was just inserted is a little hard for me to accept at the same time,
Well, thank you. Well, just a few of the main impacts that come to mind is that 535 approximately one that decimated the UK, but then this 1200 BC event that ended all these groups around the world at the same time.
Are you talking about the 12? Did you mean 1200 BC or did you mean 12,000 years ago?
1200 BC.
Okay.
And that a bunch of these groups seem to have ended right at that same time. Thera erupted, wiping out the Minoans approximately 1650 BC, approximately. So Minoans, this big power, sea power, also gets wiped out. But that this 1200 BC, something like that, an impact. The Olmec jade pieces, theoretically, possibly looking up at this impact. I don't know what's real for sure on the impact stuff, but those are the only two main ones that come to mind, other than the previous one.
On outside of the missing 1,000 years, as far as the timeline, I have a very rough idea that there could have been some type of cataclysmic event roughly 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. And when I say cataclysmic, I don't necessarily mean like Younger Dryas, because you look at the collapse of the Bronze Age. Was that cataclysmic? I mean, the whole world collapsed, right? But there's not even like a singular thing that we can necessarily point to go, this is what caused it. So when I say a cataclysmic event, it could be something more along the lines of that, where it's not necessarily this brimstone and fire, but something happens and civilizations collapsed and were restarted. And this is a very rough theory, but just like Sumeria seems to explode upon the scene. They pretty much came up with every single technological and like informational development that we managed to come up with right up until the Industrial Revolution. Like they had mastered all of it right up until the Industrial Revolution. And that spawning from essentially nothing, the archaeological story, they do show some progression, but there really do seem to be large leaps happening. So that restarting from something more recent seems like a possibility to me. And the most popular, like the Graham Hancock theory, is that the reset happened 12,000 years ago. I don't understand how to reconcile that. If there was a reset 12,000 years ago, how do you get Sumeria exploding from nothing and the 6,000 years in between, right? So putting that, if there is a lost civilization that Sumeria is spawning from, I think putting that lost civilization closer in the timeline to Sumeria rather than separating it by 6,000 years makes sense. On the 12,000 year timeline, though, I have absolutely zero issue with the idea of far, far older previous civilizations. Humans have been around a long time. I don't think it makes sense that we were just ooga boogas that whole time, right? And I think the ability to lose evidence for these civilizations is far, far greater than people like to assume. I think the powers of destruction and loss are far, far greater than people like to assume. So some of these megalithic structures being potentially like 12,000 years old, I think that could be the case. um, previous civilizations existing long, long ago, tens and hundreds of thousands of years ago, I think could be the case. But trying to ascribe the majority of the megalithic structures to this super duper ancient, I think is a mistake. I don't think many of them would have survived that long. We look at like how thoroughly things are buried in Peru, like we were talking about earlier. So I think that if there was a lost civilization that was responsible for these megalithic structures that show all of these similarities around the world, I don't go back to 12,000 years. I go back to like 5 to 6,000 years. But that's all just theory.
Well, that's beautiful. Is the Sumerian, do you like the thoughts of the Anunnaki thing, or is that crazy? Or?
I really don't know.
Okay. I don't
I
either.
don't have any issues with ancient aliens, but I don't. I just kind of leave that in the I don't know category.
Yeah, me too. I'm there. I figure I'll get there shortly. The I mean the Bosnian pyramids is one thing. That's Dr. Sam Osmanagic. That's like an incredible so yeah, that's old. That's 30,000 years old, no problem. And people think Egypt, farther back, and Turkey. But India, if you're saying those are 1,000 AD, which very possibly you could be right, of course. But that it's such a technology to do that type of work. And that's just a conversation I haven't had yet. And, it's just, there's a lot of those temples in India, obviously.
So many.
And then Africa was this, lush, green, Near East, this green, wonderful, and now it's not. And all the evidence just goes away, obviously. So North America is a big secret of ancient stuff. It's just for some reason people they haven't, the states don't, the state archaeologists, the state geologists, they don't talk to each other. They don't talk to West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee. They don't talk to each other across the state lines. I mean, it's laughable, but it's shockingly true. So I'm having fun trying to figure out some of these things with you. We're doing pretty good work.
I talk a lot about conspiracy and cover-ups, and I actually do put a lot of effort into like dismissing those ideas because as you just highlighted, the states don't even talk to each other. That's just how that's set up, right? It's not like someone's pulling puppet strings to make sure they don't talk to each other. They just don't. And so a lot of the things that are being covered up and seem like there's conspiracies around them, I think the majority of that is organic, and not to say that there's not necessarily someone nudging things in that direction, but human nature is very easy to take advantage of. And I see that as what's happening more so than like actual cabals of people, exerting direct pressure on people. However, when it comes to North America, and we talked earlier about like manifest destiny, and how America wouldn't even exist if we actually acknowledged these things. I think this is one area, diffusion is one area where there actually is conspiracy. There actually is active cover up. There actually are people pulling strings to hide things. Yeah.
Well, beautiful. And thank you. You're amazing, Goop. So Oxford, or the story's Oxford, and I'll get the story eventually, but 1850s, they literally publicly go out there ever since then and say, there is no contact across the seas. I mean, it's literally a mandate from the earliest days that one of them was that nobody will believe, you can't question evolution, because if anybody, if he knew the theory, then he wouldn't be talking like that. It's but the Oxford one is basically that nobody is going to believe that there was contact between the old world and the new world, and that was a rule set down just in stone, like, you're not one of us, you're not part of us if nobody would believe that there was contact. the cocaine mummies, the nicotine mummies, the list goes on and on of the contacts. So thank you
And
for
it's
that.
still one of the most strongly enforced rules. Yeah. Like you there's many topics that you really aren't supposed to touch in archaeology, but that is like top of the list.
They
Yeah.
literally don't offer good archaeology classes in the Americas. Like, somebody please correct me on this matter, but they just don't. Most of those journals they discuss overseas I mean, there's not a focus on North America stuff. They're certainly hiding North American old journals, Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama. Like, you cannot get these journals anymore. They're preventing you from seeing and sharing digs and artifacts and pictures, and all the museums have been closed all across the Americas. Everyone that
Yeah.
I tell this to can't believe it.
NAGPRA, I've talked a lot about NAGPRA. The situation is pretty complex and it's so much worse than anyone thinks. But if I can try and sum it up, American archaeologists view archaeology as an evil white supremacist act, an act of colonization and oppression. American archaeology is over 99% left leaning. It is one of the most left leaning institutions in America. And so there have been absolutely no brakes on this crazy train. It has become such an echo chamber of extreme leftism that we truly have reached a point where American archaeologists are taking it upon themselves, not even like as individuals, as a collective, to erase and destroy all American archaeology. Because again, this is, to them, that's progress, right? Because eliminating colonization, eliminating racism, that's progress. So in order for them to progress, they have made it their mission to destroy American archaeology. And I realize that's a very extreme statement, and it's one that's hard to believe, but it's absolutely true. And it's being enabled by the federal government through NAGPRA. NAGPRA was reinterpreted January 12th of 2024, and it was massively expanded. It was written very deliberately to be as broad as it can possibly be, and in fact was so broadly written that they needed to add an addendum to it to specify that it would not apply to American citizens, individuals, because originally it would have, because it now applies to literally every single business, every single entity, anything that is not an individual U.S. citizen, effectively, in America. And it also applies to literally every scrap of information about Native Americans that is now at least potentially illegal to display to the public. And that's why you saw so many museums closing. That's why tens of thousands of images that were hosted online in galleries have been removed. Books are being removed. And here's the thing, you'll find a lot of references. And if you go to Dr. Elizabeth Weiss, she'll provide a lot of references to artifacts being removed, art being removed, all of this kind of stuff. You won't find any references to books being removed directly, because even within this extreme leftist echo chamber where they're bragging about removing all of these things, even they understand that removing books from shelves is a bad look. So they do it quietly, right? So, but you can look at articles written by Dr. Weiss and presentations written by Dr. Weiss talking about how in classrooms, archaeology classrooms, anthropology classrooms, they are having to swap the books, update the books, and to do so without any imagery of Native Americans in them. So when you're in a forensic anthropology class or a regular anthropology class, you are no longer allowed to have books with images of Native Americans in them. So if that's happening to the classrooms, obviously they're getting removed from the public libraries as well. They're just not advertising that part, because as crazy as they are, while they will brag about how, oh, we took back these artifacts that were sold to the museum as art pieces, and oh, we did this, and we burned x-rays in a ceremony, we repatriated the bodies, reburied the bodies, and then we destroyed the evidence. We destroyed not the evidence, we destroyed the research in a ceremony. They'll brag about those things, but even they know not to brag about taking books off the shelves, but it is happening. So yeah, NAGPRA is destroying American archaeology, and no one is talking about it, and it's a real tragedy.
Wow. Thank you, Goob. Yeah. Definitely stories of ships, boats, many times with giant bodies, with whatever else, and they just get dumped in the water. Um, I don't know the specifics, but those are definitely stories. They're allowed to, and it's encouraged and expected to rebury or throw away or discard any oopart, any out of place artifact. It's expected that you would rebury it as best case, but destroy it or throw it away, or that it shouldn't be in that burial, so we're just gonna
And
throw it
quite
away.
possibly never even documented because
Yes,
it's an oop art. It's not part of
it
the,
shouldn't be there. It shouldn't
so
be
we
there.
don't
This
even
is,
make a record of it.
and if when they somehow are confronted with an artifact that they cannot just shoo away with one of their little phrases, right? Then they ignore it, of course. Um, they attack whoever is presenting it. The Kensington Runestone, the Back Creek Stone, the Newark Holy Stones, all of these, they attack the people usually very often after they're dead. So you're attacking somebody that can't defend themselves. You're saying that this person hoaxed a stone to get attention, and money, even though he never made a penny in his lifetime from it. He just wanted to know what it was. He knew it was something. Everyone
Or
said it.
even in the Bat Creek Stone, where the guy didn't do any of that, and he was still slandered after his death.
They threw one of their own, a Smithsonian, threw him under the bus. I believe called him an alcoholic. I think he died of, just being upset.
Well,
Yeah,
there are people who have committed suicide because of
yeah,
this. There's
yes.
multiple cases. There's one case from Egypt that I remember specifically. He found a alabaster, like a translucent alabaster coffin, and it had a different design than any previous, not coffin, but sarcophagus. And he found it, and it got lost. The boat it was on sank in the Nile. And so he was never able to physically present it to people, but he told people about it. And they said he was a fraud and a liar. And he ended up killing himself over this because his reputation was so damaged. Well, they ended up finding not only the original one that was lost in the Nile, but another one that matched it. There was another sarcophagus later discovered after his death that was built in the same design. But yeah, he killed himself because they came after him so viciously over an artifact he found because it was a little bit different from other sarcophagi.
Yeah, suicides of the children of the people that are accused of hoaxes. Yeah, Kensington Runestone. Yeah, so because it's the Brandenburg Stone. That's a Welsh Colburn inscription until somebody corrects me. But Craig Crecilius found that thing and preserved it, and and then people say it's a hoax. I mean, these people are not hoaxing stones with a fake language or an unknown language, like in the middle of Kentucky. These are land claims. It's literally dividing the rivers. I own what's up there, at the headwaters. It's a land claim.
Yeah.
So this stuff is all over. Redbird petroglyphs in Kentucky. Incredible story of a guy preserving that fell down. All these scripts, all these ancient scripts all over it, from just different, from short form, long form Ogham to Libyan to all sorts of scripts. Darfur in Oklahoma, and Phil Leonard working on diffusion topics out there. Gloria Farley in Oklahoma, all of her work in the book In Plain Sight. A lot of inscriptions that prove contact from the Near East, Mid East, and you also don't hear the DNA evidence, which also seems to be clear of this connection.
So a fun little fact, and I guess it's not too unreasonable with the assumptions that have been made, but anytime they find in modern Native Americans DNA that they don't expect to be there, well, obviously that was just one of your ancestors. Like what your grandma slept with a white guy and lied about it. Like, because there will be people who, they have going back generations. Like, here's my family tree. It's all Indian, like all the way up until Columbus. Like, it's all Indian all the way back. And if ever DNA that's not expected to be found in there? Well, one of your grandparents cheated is the answer that's given, and it's dismissed. But yeah.
Oh, very good. Well, because I know that some of them don't want to have their blood taken, or the Kennewick man up in Washington, Dr. James Chatters, was very. His career was basically destroyed. I mean, his reputation basically tarnished for finding these bones. He was called out there. The bones are 8,000 years old. They're European features. They're not Indian, and the cover of it to rebury those bones. Those are our bones. The problem is, like Ohio, like everywhere else, whatever group lays claim to them right now gets everything and has already gotten everything. You were donating artifacts to a museum in Ohio. They then gave those artifacts to the tribe that lays claim to the Newark Earthworks right now. I mean, are we sure who built that, or 100%?
Yeah, and that's a more issue with NAGPRA. So before the update in 2024, there was a category of artifacts that was what you're describing. Like, there's a lot of tribes that no longer exist. They've been conquered, they've been whatever, right? And so there should be artifacts that are unaffiliated with current modern tribes. That used to be a designation before the update. That no longer exists. Any unaffiliated artifacts now must be affiliated with one of the 13 federally recognized tribes, and they have 5 years to return everything. Everything in their possession must be repatriated within 5 years. Without the exception to that is if those 13 affiliated tribes give them permission. So after they go, hey, here's your stuff back, they can go, well, we don't want it. You can keep it and you can put it on display. So in that case, right, it doesn't get returned. But under the law, they have 5 years to no longer have any unaffiliated artifacts. Everything must be affiliated with one of the 13 tribes, and it must be returned. And yeah, that's obviously ridiculous because they don't have anything to do with the majority of these things. And one of the things that I noticed as an effect of this NAGPRA update, and one of the things that I think is going to be a long-term effect, is there are a couple galleries online where you can find clothing, images of artifacts, things like that of Native American tribes. Most of that's been removed, but there's a couple that still exist. The thing is, those are modern. Those are modern artifacts created by the tribes that are still around today. And they're going, we want to show off our lifestyles. We want to show off our culture, which makes sense. So they're displaying the modern Native lifestyle today and like traditional, right? But it's all modern. So all of these things like the Hopewell that existed 2,000 years ago that don't have ties directly to these modern tribes, those modern tribes don't want those displayed, because it's not them. So all of that's been removed, and it will almost certainly never come back on display because those modern tribes don't want it displayed. They want their stuff displayed, not these other groups. So all that ancient stuff, all that unaffiliated stuff, it's been removed, and it'll almost certainly never come back.
And it's already been given back to the tribes, and so there's nothing that Trump or anybody can do, right?
Yes and no. So it's an ongoing process. So much has been buried, reburied, re-given to the tribes and reburied, but we still have a lot of it. And even though there's a 5-year deadline, I'd be surprised if that's met. So even 5 years from now, we'll still probably have some things. But yes, once these things are, reburied, that's it. Like, they're gone, and that's what we did with the Kennewick man. And the Kennewick man actually didn't fall under NAGPRA because it wasn't related to these Native Americans. Under today's interpretation of NAGPRA, Kennewick would fall under NAGPRA. But before the reinterpretation, because it wasn't related to these modern tribes, they actually couldn't use NAGPRA to rebury it. And so Obama made an executive order. It was an executive order directly from Obama to rebury the Kennewick man. And they reburied him in a secret, undisclosed location under 10 tons of gravel. And there was another letter written by Biden that is no longer accessible on the White House website. They've removed it because it was such a bad look. But he wrote an official recommendation to all federal employees. It was a command to all federal employees, but it was a recommendation to all American scientists. And he specifically highlighted climate scientists and a few others, but that all federal employees must defer to Native Americans whenever there's a disagreement. They must defer to them. And again, he highlighted specific groups of, so this was again, just want to clarify, an order for all federal employees. Any federal employee must defer to Native Americans, but also a recommendation to all private scientists that they should also defer, with a special focus on climate scientists. So this thing, climate change, which is this multi-billion-dollar industry, which is directly impacting everyone's lives, whether you're on the hoax side or the real side, what I just said is true, right? And so if you believe it's real, this is going to be the extinction of all humanity. And according to Biden, we should not be listening to the scientists. The scientists should be deferring to Native Americans. So this thing that is going to determine whether humanity survives or dies should be determined by Native Americans. And along with everything, this whole, the NAGPRA problem, I call it the NAGPRA problem, but it's far larger than just NAGPRA. There's an extreme culture that's been developed within American archaeology and even within our government. The Department of Interior Secretary is a Native American woman herself. She is an activist for Native Americans, and she's the Department of Interior Secretary. She controls NAGPRA. She reinterpreted NAGPRA. So it's a problem that goes through every single level, from individuals all the way up to the very top, the President of the United States. It has infested and infected so thoroughly. And because of the way archaeology works, like, no one's aware of any of this. No one knows any of this is happening.
It's beautiful, Goop. You're amazing. All right. Well, I just would ask you, just if we can wrap it up, just like, how do you see this playing out? Like, because we're in the middle of this big change, but what you're describing is ominous, and the reality. You're literally describing the reality that they're bare. So what do you see happening? Like,
there's one possible solution, right? So there are, because here's the thing, there's legal solutions. We could potentially get rid of NAGPRA. Trump could instate a new Department of Interior Secretary. That new secretary could reinterpret NAGPRA back to its original interpretations. That could be done relatively quickly, okay? It could go through the courts. NAGPRA is a blatant violation of the First Amendment. Demanding that federal employees defer to Native American religious leaders is an obvious blatant First Amendment violation. And, Mormons claim American history too. Imagine if the federal government demanded that federal employees and scientists defer to Mormon opinion instead of science, right? That would obviously be ridiculous, but because Native American religions aren't usually viewed by people the same way as other religions, it's not really a real religion kind of mentally in people's heads. This has gone over most people's heads. And thanks to Dr. Weiss for bringing the First Amendment thing to my attention.
Yeah.
It also has another avenue to be overturned through the courts, because Exxon or Shell or one of those oil companies sued the EPA for writing law, right? The EPA is not the legislative branch. They shouldn't be able to write law. And that's exactly what the Department of Interior did with the reinterpretation of NAGPRA. They're writing law, even though they can't do that. So the Shell or Chevron won that case against the EPA. So there actually is precedent to overturn this through the courts. Now, at the beginning of this, I said there's one hope. None of those are going to actually fix the problem. Even if we did all of that, we would not fix the problem, because there still exists the extreme culture of archaeology. There still exists the fact that over 99% of archaeologists are left-leaning, and they believe in this cause, the cause of destroying and erasing archaeology, because it's evil and racist. So even if we did all of that, this would still be happening behind the scenes. People would still be working to, get this outcome even without the federal government backing it. So the only possible solution is waking the public up to what is happening and generating outrage. There needs to be outrage and there needs to be social pressure on these archaeologists, because one of the things about being extremely left-leaning and, you know, being so woke and everything is you're very fragile to outside pressure. You succumb very, very quickly. And so if people get upset and they go, no, this is a tragedy, what you're doing is wrong, you're bad people, you're morally wrong, and people get upset about it, I think that is the only hope we have of actually solving this problem and reversing this problem. And yes, going through the courts and all of that, instating a new Department of Interior, that would be great. Those would be good. But without the outside social pressure, without people getting enraged at what's happening, this will not be fixed, period.
All right, Goob, you've taught me so much today, my friend. I can't even thank you enough for just anything else. I'm just blown away by what you've been saying. Really, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you
We'll
for
have
coming
to
up.
do this again. I mean, my goodness. Anything else, or any, like, you know, just, I mean, that was a very special time with you. So thank you.
Yeah, I think we covered some good stuff.
Any feedback? YouTube and Twitter, right? X. How's like the response been to your channel? Because you're like so smart. I love what you do.
There hasn't been a lot of response just because I don't get a lot of views. I'm not good at marketing and I don't enjoy it. So I just don't really do it. So not a lot of people are aware of my channel. I've got some beef with Dan from Uncharted X. He's an absolute scumbag of a human being. But as soon as I got on Twitter, pretty much, I was blocked by him and a bunch of his followers. And so my reach was like immediately limited. I'm present on X and I'm present on YouTube, and I just don't reach a lot of people, which is partly my fault because I don't do enough to try and reach people. But
we'll figure it out. We'll help. Got some ideas. There's something about the algorithm where they have 30,000 follow them, but only they follow 100, and none of them follow the outsiders. You know, certainly in the academic world, they don't follow one outsider. It's truly an incredible story. But these big, you know, presence on X, how they have the power to either block or minimize somebody's reach by
my reach was noticeably less after getting blocked by Dan and his buddies.
Yeah, well, that's I'm sorry. And you guys were working together before?
No. I just called him out for slandering the vase scan project. He deliberately lied in order to call them frauds. And so I made a video calling him out for this. And he did not handle it well.
And so you concluded that the vase scan, like, do you mind just telling me just that these are real, like Matt Beal's, just anything?
Had you asked me a couple weeks ago, I would have said, yeah, they're definitely ancient. Yes, they're real, and they most likely were not made by the pre-dynastic Egyptians, because we don't see any other evidence of the pre-dynastic Egyptians doing anything similar. You ask me now, and I'm no longer convinced that they truly are ancient. I think that the possibility that these are modern forgeries is a very real possibility. So I don't know how closely you've been following it, but Stein Gerdes, Christine is a data analyst, and she analyzed all of the vases that were scanned at the Petrie Museum by Karoli Poca recently. None of the vases from the Petrie Museum show the same level of precision that we're seeing in these vases coming from private collections. Karoli is on the side of these being ancient, right? Karoli wants that to be true, right? And we all have our own biases. We do our best to, overcome those, but like they're there, right? And so Caroli's on the side of these being ancient. He wants them to be ancient, right? So it seems safe to assume that when he went to the Petrie Museum, he truly was trying to find the best looking vases to scan, right? So it's not like he's on the mainstream side and he chose poor looking vases to pass off as no, I assume he did try to find the best looking vases he could there, and the best looking vases he could find seem to be handmade. They do not seem to be rotationally made, whereas these private collection vases that show this extreme precision obviously are rotationally made. Now, there's not enough data here to conclude that these are modern forgeries yet. But like I said, had you asked me before this analysis came out, I would have said like maybe 1% chance that they're modern forgeries. Now I'm sitting around a 50% chance. So there's still some pretty solid reasons to think these are ancient. But now with that data, I'm questioning that. I am seriously questioning that. So we need more data to come out to actually figure it out. But if none of the vases directly tied to burials show this level of precision, then it would seem to suggest that there was a very flourishing counterfeit market, in the 18 and 1900s.
And so those were found in Egypt as well, that museum that you're talking about?
The Petrie Museum. So Petrie was a pre-archaeologist Egyptologist, right? So like before archaeology was really even a thing, he was doing archaeology in Egypt, and he pretty much is the father of Egyptology because he was kind of the first to really, really document everything that he was seeing. He was kind of the first going from let me just explore and blow things up to let me pay attention while I explore and blow things up. And so, yeah, he collected a lot of vases, and he has a museum. Obviously, he's dead now, but there's a museum with his name and with his artifacts and his journals and things like that. And so Caroli, went to Egypt and scanned some of the vases that had been collected by Petrie, and none of them show this ultra precision. They show clear signs of being handmade and not rotationally made.
But those were from different collections all around, but like Matt's collection is theoretically from one site or several sites?
So Petrie found some of these himself. He would, in the field, find and excavate these things, or not even necessarily excavate these things. Sometimes they'd be found on the surface, like just sitting in the sand, right? But yeah, Petrie found a lot of these. He was also buying things from people back then. So some of the artifacts that he has could even be modern forgeries. As far as Matt Bell has been collecting these largely from Barakat, who's an antiquities dealer. In fact, I think maybe all of his vases come from Barakat, but Barakat collects them from all over. So they're all supposedly Egyptian, although this style of vase has been found in other parts of the world as well. So there are some, just on Twitter today, someone was posting, or yesterday was posting about vases that look just like this with the lug handles and everything, and found somewhere else in the Mediterranean. I forget where exactly.
Well, the ones down from Peru, those are gorgeous vases, all over, not just Peru, but boy, incredible vases of South America and Central, of course. So.
I'm aware of pottery. Do they have stone ones as well?
Well, I don't know. That's a great question, but the megaliths and structures that are buried underneath that jungle is just, we've just had an incredible brainstorm on Stuff Goop today. Really, just the complexity of the Americas, north to south, and the contact, and just what was going on in ancient times. It's fun to just kind of.
I think the narrative all over is incorrect, but in America specifically, I think is probably the farthest divergence from what was happening to the narrative that were fed by the mainstream. From North to South America, both, it was all far more impressive. They were doing so much more. They were accomplishing so much more. They were so much more intelligent than the mainstream wants to give them credit for, and yet I'm called the racist. I'm called the one that, is taking credit away from them. And I go, no, I'm giving so much more credit to them. They were doing so much more than we think they were. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they want to put down their ancestors versus elevate their ancestors to that they sail. How would the little African boy, this is Dr. Gunnar Thompson taught me this. How would the little African boy feel when he learns that his ancestors came here not just as slaves, but as merchants, navigators, and kings? It's like, how would that make him feel, or she? Like that's the type of elevation we're talking about.
Yeah.
Anyway, Goob, it's been fun. I'd love to do this again, or just connect as soon as you
Yeah,
want to. It was very special. So
whether on stream or just for a chat, I'd be down.
all right. Well, so we'll plan to. I'll connect with you again, and we'll plan to do this again.
Yeah, sounds fun. Sounds good. Well, thank you for coming on, Chris. Thank you guys for tuning in. Next week, I believe Gulag's going to come on the show and talk about the Tamuli on the Isle of Pines and the evidence for a lost civilization there. So yeah, tune in next week and join me and Gulag. His first episode where he presented Dr. Cush's findings was one of the better performing episodes. I think it might be the most viewed episode I've got. So this should be another good one. So
Goob, thank you. It's just so good to know you, and just we'll continue. I learned a heck of a lot from you today, so thank you very much.
Yeah, anytime, Chris. All right. Peace out, fellas. Catch you next week.